This programme was produced at and first aired on MPR, Manawatu People's Radio, with support from New Zealand On Air. Ka pai Irarangi Tamotu, MPR.
Kia ora and welcome to Reserved Recommendations. This is a show about great trash, difficult art, and our complicated relationships with art and culture. My name's Hugh, I'm the host of the show, and I'd like to take this opportunity to put in a very mild content warning for the show as a whole. Sometimes our recommendations on this show are reserved just because the thing that we're discussing is in some way not good, but sometimes there are aspects of the art or artist that may be confronting for some people. Check the episode descriptions for more information, and do be aware of your listening environment. Kia ora and welcome. This is Reserved Recommendations. It's a radio show and podcast about great trash and difficult art. I don't know that this movie necessarily qualifies as either of those things, but we can get into that. It gives me very great pleasure to welcome Arka and Caleb of the podcast Life, Love and Lenses. I say podcast, but it's kind of like a wider universe of projects now, right?
A multiverse.
Yeah. Multiverse, yeah.
Anyway, thank you guys very much for coming on and for getting me to watch this movie, which I, to be honest, probably wouldn't have got round to otherwise. It's one of these things that I understood was really significant, but it's just, you know, there are a lot of movies and you only have so much time and life and things keep getting in the way. And also it's kind of difficult to find, as it turned out. But can I ask, well, whichever one of you wants to go first, I suppose, like what made you guys pick this movie as a thing to look at?
I think I can answer that. So the movie we are going to talk about today is Cinema Paradiso, directed by Giuseppe Tornatore. I don't know if I have mispronounced their name by any chance.
I think it's Giuseppe, but
Yeah.
but that's my like Scottish Italian Giuseppe.
Wait, hang on. Do you have Italian heritage?
No, but I lived in Glasgow for a while in Scotland, and Glasgow has a specific Scottish Italian subculture because a lot of Italians came over to do labouring work and then stayed. So there are lots of people called Giuseppe, and Italian restaurants and that sort of thing.
Yeah, right. And that's the first thing we need to discuss about this movie. It's very Italian.
It's very Italian. and actually there's a thing there which I suppose is a little bit of it's an interesting kind of point of political contention or something, I suppose. But like one of the kind of so it's the story of this kid who grows up in love with projecting movies and then sort of in love with movies as well, and it kind of follows his relationship with the cinema. But the reason that he's kind of running riot is that his father is off fighting in the war and then dies and never comes home. And the thing that kind of has to be true because of the time period that the movie's set, but that the movie just completely fails to address, is that his dad would have to have been fighting as a fascist, right? He would have to have been part of Mussolini's army.
That's 50s, yeah. Yeah, so the movie starts, I think, I would say late 40s to early 50s. Yeah, it doesn't actually specify. We only get to see it, I think, once, like when he's a bit grown up, like in his teenage years. 1954, I think the year comes in at some point in the movie. But yeah, that makes you think, yeah.
yeah, it's just, I mean, it's kind of it's a thing that can just completely go past you. But if you stop and think about it for a second, you go, oh, that's a heck of a thing to just kind of leave out of your movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think that was the primary focus or any focus at all. Like, okay, so the reason we picked this movie to discuss on your show, I think it's one of those movies that make you appreciate life. Mm-hmm. Like, you know, the story isn't like too special, I guess. Like, it's just a person. We are just looking into this, like looking at this person from his very early childhood to his grown-up years and like what he's been through. But it way that describes and portrays his young self to adolescent to his grown-up self, like, it's one of those movies that makes you appreciate the little things about life, makes you feel really nostalgic. Yeah, I can't really explain why, but each time I watch this movie, it reminds me of home. And because like I have this particular kind of, I could relate with the protagonist, Toto. Salvatore, I think, like, Toto is his middle name. Like how he misses home, but he also doesn't want to go back because he doesn't want to give in to the nostalgia.
Yeah. I mean that idea that nostalgia is kind of can be kind of poisonous is very much there, despite that it is a very nostalgic film, which is a fascinating tension. I just want to dig into something that you kind of mentioned, because you were talking about how you could relate to the way that he this relationship that he has with the cinema, and I just wanted to dig into that a little bit, because for people who haven't seen the movie, what it does is it follows his relationship with the only movie theater in this tiny little Italian village, which is like the source of entertainment for the community. And so you get to watch like all of the characters from the little village come in, and you see them change over time. And because it's like the only thing to do, they keep coming back. And that's kind of the hook that lets you see everything develop. And I guess I wanted to ask about your relationship with cinema, because you're, of course, from India, and I know that like movies are incredibly important in India, and there are all of these regional cinemas. Like, does that relate to the way that movies were when you were growing up?
Absolutely, yeah. You hit the nail on the head with that. Absolutely, like so going to the cinema was almost like an event as a child, like growing up, because. Like, if you go back like 20 to 30 years from now, like there weren't many things that we have right now for entertainment. Like, cinema was the thing. Like, I still remember, like, we could only afford to go to the cinema once in every 3 or 4 months. But, like, I would be looking forward to that. Oh, my God, we are finally going to go to the cinema. We're finally going to go to the movie. And... yeah, I think that's definitely where I could relate to the protagonist, like how he developed a love for the movies, and he ended up having a career in the movie world. I think he became a producer.
He's either a producer or a director. It's kind of not really clear, because like the movies that he makes are not really the point of the film, and so you never really find out much about them. Just that he's kind of like rich and successful.
But cinema, though, like, how grandiose it used to be. Single screen hall, I don't think it's a thing anymore. It's not a thing anymore. But, and you could see, like, all these people growing up, like, as the movie progresses, but they're still coming back to the cinema. Then you have also these dodgy side things going on at the cinemas. There's a mini brothel there. But now, what I am interested to hear is Caleb's perspective, because, like, I think you and I could also. I think you could relate, like, to that feeling, like, particular feeling, like going to the cinema experience.
Yeah. I mean, I'm the kid of people who were just slightly too young to be proper hippies, but bought into a lot of that stuff, and so like we got a TV when we lived in the UK. So I would have been like 10 or 11-ish, because my dad wanted to do Open University, which is a thing you can do in the UK where it's just like distance learning university courses, and all of the lectures are on TV like at 5 a.m. or like 2 a.m. And so you can either tape them or stay up real late to get them. Or that's what it was in the 80s when he did that. But before that, my mum was violently opposed to the idea of TV, so we didn't have one. But we, as like Orko said, we went to the movies maybe once every few months, and it was just this like massive kind of reality-altering thing that you go and see this enormous picture with everything really loud, and it's just kind of overwhelming in a good way.
Oh, I totally relate to that, especially the whole my parents weren't really against TV for the whole, I guess, hippie aspect of it. But they had the common saying like, don't watch TV too long, you're going to get square eyes. They would use that kind of quote. And so I was raised in a slightly different time period than both of you guys. So I recently, I'm only like 20 and now there's already all these streaming services and it's kind of a completely different landscape. But when I was younger, so this was probably where my passion for film came in, was I did definitely have a very similar experience with the movies. So when I was younger, we had a box TV still. So watching TV at home was like fun, but it was more like TV. It wasn't movies. And even when we did, like, eventually we got a flat screen TV, which was really nice at the time. We would go out to the DVD store, and that was kind of my like most nostalgic part of seeing movies, was going to the DVD store, seeing all these different DVDs talking about movies. But definitely the movie experience when I was younger, I definitely relate to that because it was that whole, I guess it was the peak of the multiplex kind of cinema scene where there was heaps of big, I think it was downtown cinemas at the time. And as a little kid walking into a massive cinema with these massive speakers, it was just like mind-blowing. It was absolutely amazing. And that was kind of what drew me in. And experiencing these worlds. And then eventually as I grew like older, it was also cheaper, I think. So when I was in like intermediate, which is year 7 and 8, when we were like 12 and 13, I would end up going, like, spending all my pocket money every week. I would go to a movie pretty much every weekend. And it was an amazing experience that I think the stuff I learned from the films, like Cinema Paradiso, as we'll like talk about later, the stuff I learned from the films also influenced my life. Because in Cinema Paradiso, we'll elaborate on this later, but about the whole kissing scenes that he watches and that.
Well, that's the thing that I guess I wanted to talk about as well, because the other thing about the cinema in Cinema Paradiso is they're not showing Italian movies, right?
No.
They're showing whatever's big. So it's big American movies, but they're translated into Italian, which is fascinating because you get to watch all of these, like, you get to see little snippets of what they're showing in the movies. And so you get to see all these kind of iconic, like, 40s and 50s American movies, but in Italian with whoever they got to do the voices, which is fascinating.
And it's also interesting to see how it connects all the characters in the film. Like, the movies they're playing, they're just the movies, the kind of big movies they could get their hands on at the time. So it wasn't necessarily like a big range of movies. So there would be like 60-year-olds watching these kids' Charlie Chaplin kind of movies and seeing how it will connect with them.
Exactly. There's no concept that like cinema is for a target audience at all. Like, everyone goes and they watch all of the movies that are available. And so you see like a cowboy movie and a romance picture and a Charlie Chaplin comedy. And
but that was usually the only form of entertainment for the whole village. I think there's a pub and there's the movie hall, and that's it.
And that thing you said about they're showing whatever they can get their hands on as well, right? Like, there's this phenomenon. So I'm on Facebook. I'm in a couple of fan groups for a couple of different manga and anime series, and those groups are just full of people speaking Spanish, because it turns out that when TV was just getting off the ground in South America, what they could get their hands on was anime from Japan.
Oh,
and so there's this whole generation of people who grew up watching TV in South America, and what they got was Japanese anime, but not the censored cuts that America got, because their standards of what they needed to do for censorship were different. So they got like the ultra-violent 90s Japanese anime just with Brazilian dubbing over the top. Or Portuguese or whatever. Yeah. And so it's like anytime you go into those spaces in the internet, it's just full of people speaking Spanish and Portuguese, because like that's what they had.
It'll be interesting to see how these how this experience of what movies you watch when you're a child actually influences each society. Like, because I'm sure it has a big influence, because even in like New Zealand, we do have our shows that every Kiwi kid who's around my age would have seen them, like, the typical Disney shows or the Cartoon Network, Hey Arnold. I don't know if you guys know that, Cat and Dog.
I'm just old enough that, like, as I was starting to age out of after school TV is Hey Arnold and Cat Dog, basically. So that was sort of the tail end of me watching that stuff, was when that stuff started to come in.
Yeah.
But yeah, exactly.
It's crazy that it can connect two generations. Like, it's just kind of both of us know about that, yet we were watching it kind of at different stages.
I guess, I mean, some of the stuff also, like, it becomes globally popular because it transcends language. So, like, the Looney Tunes shorts got everywhere globally because they're mostly not spoken.
Yeah,
There's some dialogue, but it's mostly irrelevant.
Like Tom and Jerry.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, I love Tom and Jerry.
So, like, anyone can get it. It's really obvious that the cartoon cat wants to hit the mouse with a hammer, and you don't really need to have any more cultural context than that.
It's the accessibility that matters. Yeah, but it's so interesting, isn't it? Like, they were screening whatever they could find at that particular time. What I also like is the priest censorship.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because, I mean, they're not just going, what can we get our hands on? It's then filtered through their cultural context, which is like incredible amounts of control by the Catholic Church. And so, yeah, like you say, the priest sits there and watches the movies and rings a bell every time he doesn't like something. And then the poor projectionist has to manually cut the things out with a razor and then tape them back in again before he sends the movies back to the distributor, is what he says. Which is just, oh, God.
It's incredible work for it. But now, someone says, like, for 20 years, I haven't seen a single kissing scene in the movie. But the moment the cinema gets rebuilt, should we touch on that, like what actually happened?
Absolutely. We should probably go through. So, I mean,
spoiler alert, by the way.
Well, I mean, look, this is a spoiler alert for a movie from 1988.
I think it's 98. Oh, is it 1988?
1988.
Yeah. So, I mean,
that's 35 years.
As I said at the start, it is a little bit difficult to find the version that we all watched, which is the theatrical cut.
First thing, we need to talk about how many versions that are available. First, it was released in Italy and European region as a 2 hours and 36 minutes version, I think. Wasn't a success. The director then shortened it down to the version that we saw, 2 hours and 3 minutes, I believe. Instant hit. And this is the version that won the Academy Award in 1990, I believe. There's another cut floating around. That's the director's cut. It's 2 hours and 53 minutes long. So there are many, many versions available. But it's one of those rarest examples where the editor's cut is, like, arguably better than the director's cut. And director has actually admitted to that fact. No, actually the editor's cut is better than the version that we released worldwide. That's actually better than my cut.
There is value to the idea of killing your darlings, like sometimes something that seems super important to you because you're so close to it actually is a digression or sucks energy out of the movie when people who don't have your very hyper-specific perspective try and watch it.
I think another probably challenge for the director would have been the fact of how well he knows it and how much he thinks other people know, because the whole difference between his cut and the theatrical cut is actually how much it elaborates on the themes of love and actually what happens. And probably as a director, since he knows it so well, he's like, how much do I need to leave in? How much do I need to cut out? And probably it really needed that second pair of eyes to really actually do that cutting for him.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like that slightly more dispassionate view of the movie and less familiarity.
So if he was the director's cut, it will get more out of this universe. But it feels quite bloated.
I feel like, although you'll get more, I feel like it's almost less though, because it's almost like I forgot what it was called, but there's J.J. Abrams, he has this like theory or whatever or something about the
mystery box idea,
and it's like I feel like the theatrical why is it such a hard word to say? I feel like the theatrical cut is kind of like a mystery box in a way, because the themes that I know I got out of it are actually different to what the director wanted you to get out of it, and I could really relate to it because of the gaps that weren't filled, because I could relate to being in a small town, Palmy, and I connected the dots to my own dots in my own life, and I think that's what really gave that cut more value.
Sometimes being ambiguous actually helps. Yeah,
Yeah,
so like staying ambiguous. Yeah.
And I mean, like a lot of the kind of flesh of the movie, I guess, is all of these quite small, in terms of their impact on what happens, kind of ancillary characters and watching them develop. And, you know, you probably don't need to see that detail with those guys. You can go, here's this guy doing this thing. Oh, look, it's him doing the same thing again, but he's older. And you don't need to know what he had for breakfast in between then. You can just see the simple, like, repetition of the same sequence that takes about 30 seconds twice, and that's enough for you to join the dot.
It's really good for the world building. Like, it felt like a really real, like, city. The people felt so much more real because of all those little details that were put in. Even on the square, how there was that guy who kept saying it was his square. Kind of reminded me of the square in Palmy.
And also, like, that actually took me back to my childhood. So, like, you know, the city that I grew up in, Berhampur. We used to have a square, and we used to have kind of like a loon. Well, it's not a right word to describe him, I guess. There's someone who used to live in that particular area, and he used to say, "Oh, this is my area. This is my area." Yeah, like I don't know. Like, even though this was set in 90s, 50s to 1970s Italy, I think somehow, I feel like connected to this film's universe in a way. Yeah,
and it's almost something I noticed while I was watching it was. It almost transcended techniques, even film techniques, because it wasn't the most visually stunning film. There were some shots that were great, but
it's pretty. Like they've got an eye for composition. The way they start, it's like looking at the sea, and then it comes back over a bowl of fruit, and then back into the room.
Oh my God, the dolly out opening shot.
That's really pretty. It's really effective, but it's not like technically mind-blowing.
No.
Yeah, and I felt like that while I was watching it. It felt almost visceral in a way that I hadn't seen movies in a long time be visceral, because now it's like modern technology is so accessible that we really can just create really cool-looking things really easily, but we forget the substance and the stuff that's behind it, and that's what this film, like, through those little characters, the little feelings it gives us, it feels just you're really there.
Yeah, I kind of further want to touch on that, because like there is no superbly clever technical things involved here or mentioned here. You get to really focus on the story and the characters. So, and that's how it almost immerses you into this like universe. Like, even though you're not necessarily like going to relate to this particular character, but you feel this connection.
Yeah, and it's not like an epic story in a way. No. It's just a story of someone's life, and the beauty that's captured through the subtleties in that is what gives it its power.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, part of the point that it's making, I suppose, is that these quite ordinary lives do have these moments which belong to epic stories. You know, there is like a grand story of love lost. There is a kind of tragic story of the original projectionist, a guy whose job, like, there's a fire in the projection room, and he
lost his eyes,
blinded as a result. And you know, this idea of this man who's given all of this time of his life and become incredibly good at this really specific thing, and that thing destroys him in return, is this kind of grand tragic thing, but it's at the scale of like the projectionist in a local movie theater in nowhere in particular in rural Italy. Yeah.
It's not like a superhero fighting for the world. It's like, just a small little city, just another theater burning down, because this was like a common thing.
Oh yeah, because in the early days of movies, film stock was incredibly dangerous.
Yeah.
Which is actually something I didn't fully even realize how bad it was until watching this movie, and I was like, oh wow.
So it actually portrays the evolution of cinema in a way, like in how far we have actually come along. Yeah.
Probably why it did so well at the Oscars as well, because it was...
Well, I mean, the Oscars love movies about how good movies are.
Yeah.
A celebration of movies.
As a rule, it's a good way to win an Oscar is to do that.
But I think we would remiss if we don't acknowledge a very special person, the composer.
Yes, of course.
I was wanting to talk about the composer.
All right,
Ennio Morricone.
Yeah, and so if people are not familiar with Ennio Morricone, just think of the soundtrack of a cowboy movie. Yeah. And that's the guy. And it turns out, incredible music. Yeah, absolutely.
That stays. Like, these are the kind of music that will stay with you forever. You will never forget about this music. And I think, like, this is how the movie captivates you in. Like, towards music. Like, of course, the story is there. Of course, the character is there. But the music, that score, my God.
I still got it in my head. The
My
do.
God. It's such a simple arrangement. Like, when you really dissect the score, there's nothing grandiose about it. But somehow there's this human element to it. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's just so fascinating, that score. My God.
Yeah, it's really good. So I think we're probably around about the halfway break. So we might just take our halfway break and we will be back right after this.
Support this show and others like it by giving a donation. For more information, go to www.mpr.nz/donate.
You're listening to Reserved Recommendations. This is a radio show and podcast about problematic faves, great trash, difficult art, sometimes just talking about things that we like or solving the world's problems. It is made with the support of Manawatu People's Radio in New Zealand On Air, so cheers for that, guys. Right now I am talking to Arka and Caleb from the podcast and extended universe Life, Love and Lenses about the movie Cinema Paradiso, which is, if you're listening to the radio as opposed to the podcast, I suppose, and you just tuned in halfway through, a movie about like a man's relationship with not just cinema as a concept, but also a specific cinema in a small town in Italy and the way that changes over time. And something that we mentioned in the first half but didn't get to is that the cinema itself is destroyed in a fire. We mentioned that the projectionist is blinded, but the whole cinema goes up in smoke, and then there is a new Cinema Paradiso and everything changes.
It was, I think, reopened by a guy who won the lottery ticket, I think.
Yes, that's right.
Like, you get to see like all these characters' journey as well. Like, obviously, like, you have the protagonist, but you get to see a bit of sneak peek of all the other people that are living in this particular village. There is a guy who met his love at the cinema, I think.
Yeah, you get to see the relationship, like they meet and then the relationship sort of develops and then eventually they're at the movies with a baby and it's great. it's just so lovely.
It was interesting to see the cultural norms change as well. Like with the I think there was at the start there's caning children, and then it was progressing from those points and seeing all those little details from different points in time just change throughout the movies.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean the change to the new Paradiso with its new management sort of brings that change of philosophy as well, because that's the point at which the kinds of movies that they're showing start
censorship.
Yeah, start to change. And that's a kind of a tectonic shift.
Yeah, young boys touching themselves and adults joining them. Yeah.
I guess that's where was I going with that? I feel like that is an interesting mirror to the way that movies themselves were changing through the 60s and 70s, like becoming much more willing to be explicit about sex and sexuality and the kind of rise of, I guess for want of a better term, like exploitation genre cinema, like actual kind of grimy horror and like that slightly
like smutty movies.
Well, smutty, but also like the willingness to be like more obviously violent or more sensationalist as well.
I also think it came with the rise of commercialism. Like, you could see the differences in how the theatres were run from a business point of view. Before, it was kind of the church was controlling it. It wasn't making probably a huge amount of money in comparison to afterwards, where they expand to 2 cinemas. And I think a lot of those changes with that sort of stuff probably occurred to get more people into the cinemas, more money, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, certainly like the drive towards sensationalism in cinema is like an arms race, you know, like what's the biggest bang for our buck in terms of how cheaply we can make a movie and how many people are going to want to see it. Well, we'll put some boobs on the poster and maybe we'll suggest that the lady might get ripped in half by a werewolf. And like people will show up for that and it'll cost us very little to make.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's a very interesting point you made. It's the commercialization of cinema, and we get to see that. Also, I think it was around late 70s or early 80s, like people were doing all those like experimental movies and also like, you know, showing all these forbidden elements that used to be, well, for the lack of a better word this time, like used to be forbidden in the past, like, and that was a new advent. Yeah, that was almost like a revolution of cinema.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's the point, and this is kind of outside of the scope of Cinema Paradiso because it's like framing narrative is in the 70s, I think, in the late 70s.
Yeah.
The guy in like current timeline is in the 70s, but just after or at the point at which Cinema Paradiso was being made, there was like the ability to shoot on video instead of shooting on film, which made, you know, doing things on the cheap much easier. And so people could be experimental or weird or unpleasant, and it was much less of a like financial risk to try and do that.
Yeah, like it has all these different elements, you know, it's not just this following the protagonist's journey. You get to see so many different things like the evolution of cinema and how the whole village is thriving through that particular cinema. Like if that cinema doesn't exist or didn't exist in that particular village, there wouldn't be any story for those people. Like think about it. Yeah.
And you know, the thing that provokes the fire is that the projectionist is so devoted to that idea that it's everybody's cinema is that he's distracted shooting the movie out the window and projecting it onto the wall of a building across the road. So he's not watching the projector to see if it's behaving itself. But, you know, he's really committed to the idea that like the movies are everybody's movies and this is the village's cinema and you shouldn't be, you know, excluding people from it, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was wondering, would we be able to... I would love to speak to you guys about a certain story from within the film.
Yeah, go for it.
Please.
So this is diving a bit more into the themes side of it. So I'm sure do you guys remember the story about the 100 days?
Yeah, the soldier.
I'd be interested
to
I'd be interested to get your guys' interpretation of what that means, because there's not really any set meaning, and maybe the story doesn't even mean anything. Maybe it's more what happens after the story, but I'd be interested to get your guys' stories.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I don't know if I have a really like cogent take on it. I suppose it's like it's showing it's kind of his first break with the village, you know, like the projectionist is pushing him not to be bound to the cinema because he feels like he's got a bigger thing to do. But he's quite resistant to that until he has to go and do the military service, which he doesn't get a choice about. And that kind of interrupts everything that's keeping him there. That disrupts his relationship with the girl that he's trying to form a relationship, and it disrupts his relationship with the town. And that's the point at which he comes back and everything's like not quite the same from that point on. It's like that you can never go home again, and you can't allow yourself. It's the point where he kind of realizes he can't allow himself to try to go home again because he'll get, you know, caught and he won't get the thing that he wanted out of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So I will point out the thing in question. So Alfredo, I think that's his name, the projection.
Yeah.
So Toto actually tells him, like, I'm madly in love with this girl and I don't know what to do. Then Alfredo gives him this example. Like a soldier falls in love with the king's daughter, and king's daughter tells him if he can wait outside her palace for 100 nights and 100 days and 100 nights, and then by the end of it she will be his. But right after the 99th night, like, he stood there, like, despite of any harsh environmental condition, like, there was scorching heat of the sun, then
rain and the
snow, regardless of what it was. Like, he stayed there for 99 days and 99 nights, but on the 100th day, he wasn't there. I think the way I have interpreted it, like, the soldier could demonstrate to the king's daughter, like, he was capable of doing everything. And by the end of it, the king's daughter was like, okay, so this is someone like who would do anything for me. Like, at first, the soldier was enchanted by her, but by the end of it, the king's daughter, like, the tables were turned. The king's daughter was completely enchanted. And that's the time the soldier decided, actually, you know what? It's not for me anymore.
Yeah, almost like fallen out of love with the idea of being in love.
Yeah,
and I think I really agree with that view. And I think a big part of it is mixing like romanticism with reality.
Yeah.
And that's a big theme of it. And what it means in the story is less about actually the story and more about Alfredo's personality and his point of view on life. So at this point in his life, he seems very dejected, very hopeless. He's kind of almost, he likes what he's doing, but he feels almost stuck there, and he doesn't want Toto to be this person.
Because,
and so,
he could see that, like, Toto is going to the same territory. Like, he could see a younger, I think he acts as a father figure for Toto.
Definitely.
Very much so.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And it's like, he doesn't want Toto to be in this point of view, so he tells him this story that really gets him hooked at first. It's almost, because Toto is a very romantic person. You can see it at the start when he's a kid and he's gazing at the cinema screen and his face is full of joy at just seeing these couples kiss, which is a big motif in the film. And he tells him the story and then it almost disappoints him. And he doesn't understand it at the time. And then he kind of does that himself with the girl. He waits outside for throughout the rain and the snow.
For 3 months, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know how that's humanly possible, but he does it. And I think the point of that, and the reason I wanted to bring it up is because I think that summarizes a big part of the actual film itself, and the fact that I think at its core for me, the film was two opposing viewpoints. It was Alfredo's, I guess, hurt viewpoint of the world, where he thinks to achieve success and to find, I guess, fulfillment in life, you need to go outside yourself. You need to go outside of your roots and outside of where you were raised and find, I guess, success in a more materialistic way, like directing, becoming successful in a career, because what has been his life hasn't worked for him. And Toto's view of life, I think, we can see it as a child and we can see it again at the end, is just, it's at his core and it doesn't change from the beginning to the end. It's just a love and a passion for life, cinema, and love.
So that's interesting, because I'm like, I can sort of see Alfredo's point of view in the sense that it's not so much that he's hurt, it's that he was physically hurt, but the scope of his life was very much defined down to this single, quite small world, and that he can see that that's in some ways limiting, like you do, if you want to make something great, you in any sphere, you do in some way have to kind of get outside yourself. It's difficult to do that while limiting your experience down to just this one thing. And also it seems to me like Toto's experience of the movies is like magic from the beginning. Like, this is a magic thing that does magic stuff. And Alfredo's point of view is very much, he's like a technician. Like, his job is to make sure the thing works properly and to take out the scenes that you're not allowed and then put them back in again so we don't get in trouble with the distributor, and make sure the machine doesn't catch fire, and do this thing and this thing. And then, like, after he's blinded, he comes in to visit Toto at work, and he's like, no, you need to adjust that, because he can hear that the projector's not running right. Yeah. And he's got that very much like a technician's point of view, or that's how he's portrayed. Because there is the kind of final kind of reveal at the end, which kind of shows what his other side was.
That ending,
yeah.
Beautiful.
But that he's pushing Toto to not be a technician, to go like be a person who directs technicians to assemble something grand, because he kind of senses that that's where his inclination and his talents and his view of movies is like magic will serve him.
Because he could see himself in Toto. But, I think he was like Toto at his age, but as he grew older, he essentially became a slave to this job.
Yeah, absolutely. And because he's indispensable, right?
Yeah.
He's the only person who can do it. And he's now old enough that he can't really do anything else. And so those two forces lock him into that position where he's going to be the projectionist of this movie theater until he dies, or as the movie has it, goes blind.
And I think he mentions that in the film, like, he has tried doing other job, but he didn't get a knack for any of it. And also he didn't have a family of his own, because he was so consumed by this job. Like, it was his only world, and he didn't want Toto to go to the to essentially take the same route that he did. Yeah,
and a thing just literally occurred to me this instant. It didn't cross my mind watching the movie at all, but Alfredo is presumably of an age with Toto's father.
Yeah.
Which means that somehow he avoided going to the army.
Because he
possibly
was
because he was
yeah.
indispensable where he was. Because they do show some of the movies that they're showing are propaganda movies. You know, they're created by the government to tell everyone how great the war is. And that probably plays into it in some way as well. Like, he didn't get this experience of being sent off into the world. He wasn't put at risk in the way that other people were. And I know that, that's a thing that gives people difficulty sometimes when there's this idea that there was this grand narrative and you just didn't take part in it at all. It completely bypassed you.
Yeah, almost resentment and regret, especially against himself and the choices he made. And he put all this into this kid because he didn't want the kid to end up like himself. But what I found was interesting is that the kid, Toto, he did all this stuff almost. He left. He created this world. He ended up directing or producing movies. It's not really super clear. He had women in his life, yet he didn't really seem happy at the end.
Yeah, sorry to cut you off, but you will find some resolution in the director's cut for that. So he's a producer, and by the so he visits, I forgot the name of the village, but he goes back and he meets with, I think, Elena? That's
the young woman from earlier in the movie, or
his love interest.
Yes,
Elena. So what happens in the director's cut? Like, they meet with each other, they get it on again, but they couldn't feel that connection anymore.
Yeah,
the connection is broken, and Toto says maybe it wasn't a good idea to meet with you again. And I think this is the reason why the theatrical cut didn't show that particular resolution And also, like, it's not important to the story. Like, Toto doesn't get anything out of that because that connection is lost. That connection is broken.
And I mean, I guess that's what I was saying about the idea that you can't go home again. Like these two guys have had this different approach. One of them's never never left, and it's cost him the ability to have this more expansive life. And he did leave, and he's achieved all of this stuff, but it cost him the ability to be locked into this tight little enclosed community with all of these characters who he grew up with and have that real core experience. Yeah.
Yeah. The way I viewed it was actually, I felt like with the theatrical cut, I thought it did actually have quite a nice, like, I mean, we all agree that it has a nice ending, but it did have some good resolution in the fact that I thought it was more like outside of just the characters themselves, and the fact that, in my opinion, how it started is how it ended. And while it was a journey of someone's life, the important stuff never changed from the beginning to the end. He went on this big journey, he found all this stuff, but who he was never changed. He still had that childlike wonder when he watched the screen at the end, and they watched the kissing scene, and there was a kissing scene at the end, and it's like tying this together, and that love was never lost. It was always within him, but maybe he was just looking in the wrong place, and maybe he just didn't value who he was when he was at home. He didn't value the small parts of life.
Yeah, and I guess, like, in his own way, he did kind of become a technician. He became someone who's really good at running the machine that makes movies, like the big social machine of relationships and people and money and stuff that gets you a movie out the end. And that became kind of technical to him rather than passionate. But then he has, like, we've been kind of dancing around this moment where he comes back and has the reel of film that was left to him by Alfredo, which is all of the kissing scenes.
But that's what Alfredo promises him. Like, this is you will get it someday, but until that day, I will have this thing with myself.
Yeah. And it's interesting because there's that big scene where Alfredo says, "Don't fall to nostalgia," and that end scene is just pretty much nostalgia.
I mean, it sort of is, but it's also like, we had this view of Alfredo as someone who's in some ways a bit embittered by his relationship with cinema and physically hurt by it, and is someone who knows how to make it work rather than necessarily someone who's creative. But in the final reel of all of the kissing scenes, he has put them together with intention, like he's assembled them a particular way on purpose to create this particular montage with an effect, and it is affecting, like, Toto's in the cinema by himself, deeply affected by it. And so you kind of get this extra thing of actually Alfredo had this capability within himself that he just wasn't able to use in the way that he wanted to necessarily.
That's really interesting. Yeah. I didn't get that interpretation, but like now looking at it, that makes so much sense. Like, I guess I never really saw him as a technician. I more saw it as the views of life, one being a bittered, more, I guess, logical view on life and the solutions to the problems we have, and one being a more, I guess, hopeful, innocent view. But that's a really interesting view.
Yeah, my God, this is super cool interpretation.
yeah.
And also, I quite liked your interpretation as well. Like, how you said the whole bit about the ending. Yeah. Like, okay, so before going back to his village, like, he was almost quite mechanical. Like, yeah, it's like kind of like Alfredo, like how Alfredo's job completely consumed him. Same thing happening to Toto. But the moment he visit his village and look around what's happening, the cinema gets demolished. And after he watches that film reel, something sparks in him.
Yeah. And I think the reason, like, the film personally connects to me is because, I guess, being raised in Palmy, it's, especially if you've been raised in Palmy, a lot of the people will talk about how it's, like, a lot of people, the young people will be like, oh, it's boring in Palmy, and try to escape. And even me, like, I definitely had that mentality that I needed to escape this town, that I needed to find something better, and that was how life was going to become better or more exciting, or how I was going to become fulfilled. But like, especially after watching this film and looking at my own life, like, I think it made me realize that there's so much special things that we have in our lives, and the solution is never going to be like just following a career or but finding success. It's going to be being able to appreciate what we have around us at any time, because that's the real beauty of life. It's not career success. It's not what we do even. It's how we appreciate where we are and who we have around us.
What a beautiful interpretation. Can I tell you guys something?
Yeah, go for it.
Like, this movie actually make me miss my home. Like, not Kolkata, so that's where I'm from, but I grew up in a town called Berhampur, which is very similar to the village that was portrayed in the film. Like, so going to the movie was like a grandiose event. And I think we had a few cinemas growing up. I think there were like 4 or 5 cinemas, but yeah, like you get to see so many things, like, a person going to the school, then you get to see like, like what's happening in the school, like how he used to get beaten up. Yeah, similar thing happened to me as well as a child. Yeah, it's like somebody's journey through life from their childhood to the adult phase. And even though like this is not like too grand of a story, but somehow you feel connected to him.
Yeah, like, I mean, it's in some ways it's kind of communicating a universal experience of like growing up somewhere along with a group of people and seeing as they change along with you, and I think particularly like you're relating it to Berhampur, but I'm sure that, so my wife is from Samoa, that she would have had like similar connections with Apia and with Savaii where she grew up, that, like there's something particularly about that like small town, slightly disconnected from the rest of the world, so it's got its own little bubble of culture thing that is like universal, even though the details are different from place to place, but something about like having that that little tiny enclosed universe that you live in is kind of universal to everyone who's had that experience,
What a wonderful interpretation. My God. From both of you, my God.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much for this wonderful discussion and for prompting me to watch this movie, which, as I said, I probably wouldn't have done if you hadn't said that you wanted to watch it for this podcast. I like to do 2 things by way of wrapping up an episode. The first is, do you have other things that you would recommend? If people have enjoyed this conversation, particularly if they've watched the movie, are there other things that have that same kind of, or in any way, a connection like that, or that this movie makes you think of, that you would recommend that people check out as well?
Probably our films. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, I mean, the second one is plug your shit, which we will get to in a second.
For me, like, it's always hard to think of movie recommendations on the spot. I watched one last night. This is a very obvious, like, this is a very well-known movie, and it won the Oscar for the last Oscars, but Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Yes.
I feel like it's almost similar in the way, because it's like, it's got the same themes of family, of what has meaning in our life, but almost on just the opposite of a grand scale representation. And I think it's got very similar themes, and it's very cool at its core. Yeah, it's quite beautiful.
Yeah, so I'm kind of similar to Caleb in this regard. It's very hard to think of a movie on the spot, and I have watched I don't know how many movies I've watched. I was actually trying to think of a movie where you get to see someone's journey, like from their beginning of the childhood to their adult phase. Forrest Gump came into my mind for some reason.
It does a similar thing of using this guy's journey to kind of show you a perspective on the country that he's living in, and the way that the culture changes, although it's a lot more on the nose, I'd say.
I actually have interesting one. This is much darker, but The Pianist.
Oh my
that's-
God, I love that
Because
film.
you see how the world changes and the world around him changes as the war kind of devastates it, and how he, at his core, kind of tries to remain strong. And I think that's that's also a very good one to watch.
I got someone. I got something. Empire of the Sun.
Okay, yeah, I haven't seen that one.
Christian Bale. It's again like, a wartime story. And you get to see this person's journey, like how actually war affects this person. Like at the very early of his childhood, and how he transforms into a completely different person, but goes back to the childhood innocence again by the end of it. That kind of summarizes Cinema Paradiso, isn't it? Like how he finds that childhood innocence by the end of it.
Kind of, yeah. The one that I was going to suggest was, have you heard of a movie called The Harder They Come?
Yes,
Yeah,
I have.
so
Yes,
it's a
yeah.
Jamaican crime movie. It's from the 70s. I couldn't tell you what year. It stars, the singer Jimmy Cliff as the lead role. And it's his character. He's this kind of street guy who's trying to make a life for himself, and he wants to be a musician, but he ends up becoming a criminal and dying in a shootout with the cops after he decides that he's not going to let himself be caught again. But the reason that I link to it is that it's very much like of the culture that it's showing you. Like it was made in Jamaica by Jamaicans in the 1970s. And so like the girl that he's trying to woo has a father who's a Christian preacher who's mad at him because he's hanging out with the Rastafarians, and you get to see like that conflict between the Rastafarians and the Christians and what the Christian church in Jamaica's like. He spends all this time hanging around music studios trying to get his songs recorded, and so you get to see how the music studio works, and they've got Toots and the Maytals in the movie recording a song. It's really cool. But like it's this real like local thing, and a lot of the way in which the main character thinks about being a gangster and being a criminal and being a tough guy is informed by American gangster movies that you get to see him watching in these tiny little cinemas in Jamaica. And he's like, right, that's how you do it. And so that kind of becomes the way that he builds this like crime persona, that he becomes this tough bandit that has to fight the cops and stuff.
Oh,
Yeah,
I need to check
interesting.
that
I
out.
have to watch that out.
It's really cool. I mean, it's like super low budget 70s movie. So prepare to see some very unconvincing fake blood, but it's really cool.
All right.
So finally, plug your things. We've referred a little bit to the Life, Love and Lenses many projects, but also you guys are both filmmakers in your own right. And there are places presumably where people can watch your stuff.
Do you want to start, Orca?
Yeah. So our actually films are currently in the festival circuit. There are not available version online for the time being, but we are actually in the process of making a short film together. Yeah, and you will hear more things through the pipeline for that. It's called Cookies and Cream, and also
by the way, it's about how they should bring back cookies and cream for TikTok.
Yeah.
But like what he was mentioning, like our brand, Life, Love and Lenses, we have a podcast, but we also offer a filmmaking program for intermediate and high school students, aged 10 to 18, that happens weekly at Globe Theatre.
Yeah, and we'll soon also be launching a more business-focused production company where we'll be doing more heart-focused commercials and videos and films to represent businesses.
Cool.
Yeah.
Right. So if people are in the Manawatu, or at the very least in New Zealand, and want heartfelt promotional stuff done, then check out, it's lifeloveandlenses.com is the website. Yeah.
.co.nz.
Yeah.
.co.nz. Right.
www.lifeloveandlenses.co.nz.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you
Awesome.
so
Cheers.
much for having
It was
us.
awesome to talk.
You've been listening to Reserved Recommendations, a radio show and podcast from Manawatu People's Radio, Te Reo Irirangi o ngā tangata o Manawatu. The show was produced and presented by me, Hugh Dingwall, and I also composed our theme music. It's called Sack Jazz, and you can find it at wolfboy.bandcamp.com. If you enjoyed this show, why not go ahead and share it with a friend? You can find the last 10 episodes at npr.nz/show/reserved or wherever else you get your podcasts. If you want an episode older than that, try searching for Reserved Recommendations on YouTube. You can find me on Twitter at Objective Realty, or you can follow the show on Facebook. And finally, Manawatu People's Radio is a non-profit community access station. If you like this or any other piece of their fine audio programming, why not fling them $1 or $2? You can go to npr.nz/donate for more information on how to do that.